Hi, and welcome to the Indie Music Podcast, the podcast for independent musicians and other audio professionals. We're your hosts. I'm Matt Denton, also known as Mojo of Ragged Birds Music. I'm a Bay Area mix engineer and recording artist. And Douglas Reynolds of Resonance Mastering, a mastering engineer in Bloomington, Illinois.
Welcome to Indie Music Podcast, episode 222. Tonight, Matt takes the lead in a discussion on vocal editing. He and Doug talk about various aspects of editing vocals in post-production, getting good recording vocals to begin with, and some hints and tips to help you along the way. Enjoy the show.
Doug?
Hey.
Hey, that was different. I had to consent to being recorded.
Oh, well, I would think that after the last time you would be offering to be recorded.
For sure. Now, thankfully, Logic did save. It auto-saved it. I just didn't.
Go Logic.
It wasn't in the project, but I did have the audio file. That was such a pain. Yeah, no, our listeners don't know that my computer crashed halfway through the last episode, and that's why I was quiet. That was the main reason I was quiet. This is why I was quiet for the rest of the episode there.
Yeah.
I didn't have any
interjections.
Honest,
I don't think they would know.
I didn't go, very much after my computer crashed.
You got the Slack message, keep going.
That's right. I'm like, keep rolling. And you're like, I wasn't recording the Zoom, dude. And I was like, no. I did the Luke Skywalker. No. Yeah, that was something. Yeah, it was not long after that I ordered a little toolkit from Amazon and took apart my computer and got all the dust mice out of there, blew the fans out, and yeah, it's like a different computer now. It doesn't overheat, doesn't crash every day.
You know, that's great. And it took you like maybe 30 minutes or something, and you got you were the way you were talking, it's like a brand new computer.
Yeah, it feels like it. Yeah. I mean, it was crashing all the time. I basically opened it up. I'm like, you know what? I should just reseat the RAM or something. It turns out I don't have any removable RAM in this particular model.
Oh, really? Is it an Air? Or?
No, it's just a particular. It's like it's a MacBook Pro, but it has soldered on RAM. I didn't realize that.
I didn't either.
It's just this model this year, I guess. But when I opened it up, I was just surprised because, you know, it's not like it's sitting under a desk or anything. I was surprised at the amount of dust inside. I mean, I use it constantly and it's not ever in like dirty locations or whatever, but you know, it just gathered dust, and the fans were, when I blew the fans out, just like a puff of, it was gross. Yeah, it was.
Hopefully you did that outside.
Yeah. I used to, you know, used to work in and then I managed a Mac repair shop, and yeah, I was frequently going outside with a can of air, or if I was lazy, I would blow. But because sometimes you get, you know, better service out of just blowing hard on it there in those cans of air. But man, yeah, I used to find some nasty stuff inside computers, but it's like a lifetime ago now. Anyway, that was something. But now you're recording and I'm recording and everything's good.
Yeah. And I think the way that the last show turned out is an attribution to your vocal editing skills.
Well, thank you very much. And also to your new compressor. I've had to adjust what I do because your new inline hardware compressor is really doing a nice job.
Oh, thanks. I took a picture for my recall last time.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know what I did. I must have been messing with stuff before I took the picture because it was like so far off when I tried to recall it tonight. So,
oh, really?
Yeah. Anyway, it may be a little different. I think it's a little bit less compressed, I think. Would you agree?
But you sound normal to me. I don't know if there's a difference between what I'm hearing through the Zoom versus what's being recorded.
Yeah, I'm not sure either, actually. But I have I backed the threshold way off on it, and it's just really catching any transients or anything like that in my voice when they.
Oh, okay. Because that episode, your voice was pretty pretty thickly compressed. It
Yeah,
felt
so I've
like.
just been playing with it and trying to get an idea of what I like here. So
Oh,
tonight,
that's cool.
I've kind of swung to the other end, and I've just got it really, really just barely touching the transients, and we'll see how this goes.
Well, you're making me earn my paycheck here because now, like every week that you mess with your setup, I gotta change my Doug vocals.
Yeah. Well, I like
plug and
messing
chain.
with my setup. So
I know you do. Every week it's like, what did he do this week? I gotta change this EQ and change this compressor.
yeah,
But hey, that's what I do, right?
yeah,
So, other than that, how are you?
I'm doing really good.
Like I haven't talked to you. You've been on vacation. I mean, I want to jump into the episode because you set up that pitch so nicely. You know, I just want to knock it into
It's
the
okay.
outfield,
That pitch is so good it's going to last.
the Bugs Bunny pitch. 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out. But yeah, it's like we stacked up episodes before you left, and it's like I haven't even really talked to you for weeks.
Yeah,
I
pretty
feel
much. Other than the short banters of frustration about the work days and stuff like that.
Right. Little check-ins. Yeah, which is cool. Yeah, I do miss chatting. So, but good vacation.
Yeah.
You feel all
Yeah, it was fantastic. So
yeah, it's funny how well, it's not funny, but it's like there's like a 3-day rule. It takes you 3 days to kind of wind down from work and get over the stress of it and just kind of like finally relax and get out of that headspace. And then it takes you about 3 minutes to get, when you open your inbox and work kind of clobbers you and you're like, well, there goes all my relaxation.
yeah, we got out of there, and I was not in the mood to spend another night in a hotel.
Oh,
And so I looked over at my wife and I said, I'm going for this. And so I put in like I don't know how far that was, 980 miles or something like that. 15 and a half hour, 16-hour day.
straight through?
Straight through. Boom.
Oh my God. That's long.
I still got it.
Man, I learned in my youth when I had more stamina that about 500 miles a day is about peak. 400 to 500.
Yeah, that's a good trick. I don't know. I was just feeling like I want to do something epic. I want something for the kids to talk about. I want to brag about it on the podcast. You know, I'm just going to go for this. So
Right on. Now, I will say I have driven, it's 400 miles almost door to door from here to see my son in LA.
yeah,
I have done that twice now in one day, there and back.
we did 17 states in 15 days in a road trip
Oof.
where we went out to the West Coast, came in down in San Diego, drove up the 101 and all the way up into Oregon and then Washington.
Oh, wow.
And then came back. Yeah, we went out. We were down, went down through Texas and New Mexico and down into Tucson, Arizona, and then I think
I've been there.
like 10 Highway 10. We took into San Diego. Man, what a drive! It was awesome.
Oh, I bet.
We love being in the car and just seeing stuff. You know,
If you have a good car,
yeah,
it can be a treat because that's a whole swath of the country that's just beautiful and as varied as you can imagine.
yeah.
From desert and canyons to redwoods and forests and hills and mountains. Yeah, wow.
And if you're coming back on the northern interstate, I-90 and stuff, you got to stop at Al's Oasis. If you're in that neighborhood, man, it's the best place ever.
Where's that?
Al's Oasis. Where's that? In South Dakota, maybe? I'll have to look.
Oh, okay. Never been to the Dakotas.
Oh, yeah, it's really beautiful there. Especially you get up in there around Devil's Tower and the monuments and the national parks and everything. It's
That
pretty
is
neat.
cool. We could do an episode on like our epic road trips, as I've had a couple.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, and hey, kind of in context is like, so I really got to say Spotify kicked ass on this last trip. So
Nice.
I was pulling up some music and we just let it run and after it plays whatever your selection is, it'll go into like
Right.
radio mode,
Yeah, I love that.
and dude, it nailed it so hard. And the stuff that was coming up, and there was things that I hadn't heard in a long time, and there was other stuff I'd never heard before.
Nice.
And was, I got a whole new set of stuff that I'm digging on listening right now because Spotify nailed it. So got to.
Yeah, I do love that. Their algorithm is killer. And I've said that for a while that that everything else, like all other things being equal, their algorithm, to me is their killer app. Like their whole daily mix, 1, 2, 3, 4. Like I listen to those all the time working out. And when I let stuff go onto radio mode, because I do listen to albums, it knows me. Like it knows my taste. And half the time I'm stopping and looking, who's this?
Yeah.
All right, I got to add that guy. I never heard this one before. I'm going to bookmark that for later because it's got my number, and I love that.
On the downside, I'm not getting my data kickback from my cellular carrier this month. So,
oh no, ouch.
Oh well.
Oh well. Oh, cool. Now here's what's funny. I was when after you did your epic episode on patch panels, and you said, "Okay, now your turn to be a subject matter expert," and I'm like, I don't think I'm a subject matter expert on anything. I'm a student of life. I'm a student of everything. I could talk about vintage cameras for a while, but and then I thought, oh hey, let me do I do a lot. Obviously with this podcast, I've done the post on this for some time now. And with all the music I mix, I've been vocal editing for a decade, really. It's something I can talk a lot about, but I thought, do I really have enough? Can I really talk about this for more than 15, 20 minutes? And I started making notes, and I think that I can.
Yeah. Well, I like the topic because vocal editing, it's where I get to do stuff like vocal editing. Yeah, has to spend and time and post production. And you can fix that,
No, I can't fix that.
Oh, I know you can.
It's not
challenge
there.
On, man. There it is. I want to hear that perfectly in the playback.
What? I can, but I'll have to do an A/B so that people know what that was. Yeah, let's get into it. Vocal editing. So I wanted to make sure that this was not, venturing too much into stuff we've talked about before, vocal mixing and vocal recording, but I do have to mention a couple things. One is obviously, as with anything, everything's got to start with a good recording. So anything you do well at the source saves you, it's what is it? The stitch in 9 saves 5. No, the penny. What's the expression I'm looking for?
All day long, you'll have good luck.
No, more like a
stitch in time saves 9.
No, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. That's the one I'm looking for. So, like, the better your upfront recording, the more you get right at the source, as with anything in mixing and recording, the more you get good at the source, the less work you have to do down the road. So if your levels are good, if your recording is clear, it's in a clean environment, and ideally you have 24, you're recording 24-bit, so you have nice headroom, then your job is so much easier later. So recommend you're recording vocals in 24-bit to start. You're using a good microphone with a pop filter in a relatively clean and treated space, whether that's a closet or a vocal booth or whatever that isolates your vocal. And your level is good. Level is super important. Ideally, just like a final mix, it should be basically RMS -18 with peaks around -6, I think. The tricky part about vocals is that, well, speaking is a little different. Like editing a podcast is usually a little different, although I tend to sit back or trail off. Most people's speaking voice, especially if they do podcasts a lot or interviews a lot, will be more or less consistent level, as opposed to, say, singing, which is super dynamic. Even if you have somebody who's really good with mic technique, backs off the belting and comes in for the intimacy, it'll still be such a very dynamic range that's one of the things that makes vocal treatment and mixing tricky.
Now that dynamic range is something that's great, though. It's something that is desirable when you're done. So
it is.
It's not like you have to try to correct and normalize that or anything, right?
It depends on the final usage. If it's just a podcast, you do want to, a little compression goes a long way, but you want to bring up the low stuff and maybe bring down the peaks. You never want to be clipping. That's one thing I will say about vocals. You definitely never want to be clipping because you can't get that out. I mean digital clipping. I mean,
Yeah.
you never want to hit that red, but you can get a quiet vocal, but you'll have to bring it up. And if you bring it up, you'll bring up the noise floor. You'll start to hear the other stuff in the room, the air conditioner, the street noise, or whatever. Depending, I'm thinking mostly of home recorders because that's kind of our audience. So ideally, you don't want to gain things too much. You want to get the good level at the outset, but you can. I think that you should probably gain things with by either doing, you know, a trim plugin to bring the level up, or region gain or track gain to bring the level up before you start doing things like compression. And you don't want to do automation until the very end, I think, because that's hard to undo, and you do a lot of other editing. One thing that I do, I'm going to think right now about, say, when I'm editing podcasts. I do start with a good level. You start with a good level. We have that, kind of dialed in. We both use gates. So that's something that we do. Say we get a vocal in and you want to edit it, and you want to treat the space between the words, the pauses when you hear things like, people fidgeting around or bumping the microphone or touching the desk or touching papers or clicking a pen, all that stuff, that needs to go. Right. Yeah. So, a gate helps. A gate helps with that because you can set the threshold so that it basically turns on and just stops any noise getting through below a certain threshold. I tend to keep mine around -38, I want to say. Some stuff will still get through.
On the noise floor that you have.
Yeah, it's contingent upon your room. I mean,
and you'll
I can
see
sit
it.
in this room, and yes, yeah. What I do, one of the things that I do, I'm like, I feel like now I want to go back and forth between things that I do, so that you have practical application, and things that I wanted to say that are just like theory that you need to think about when you go into the process. But one of the things that I do when I am looking at a vocal that I'm editing is there probably is in every DAW, but in Logic there's a button you hit that basically expands it doesn't turn anything up, but it expands the waveform, so that the waveform gets bigger without actually turning anything up, so that you can see all the peaks and valleys better. And that's an easy way to see all the little things in what's supposed to be silence, but is really like somebody clicking their mouth or touching a desk or picking up their phone or whatever. And those can easily be edited out.
Now, I'd like to stop you for just a minute because we skimmed over one thing in passing where you mentioned automation, and I think maybe that could use a little bit of clarification because maybe there's people going, "What's automation?"
Oh, automation is kind of what it sounds like. It's when, and if you've ever seen people pushing up a fader, to make things louder or softer, you can program that with what's called automation, which is where you have your digital audio workstation do movements up and down of volume. You can do that with panning, of course, and everything else. But if, say, you have a passage that's mostly the same, but one is really loud or one is really soft, you can draw in some automation to have your DAW turn just that section up or down, and then move on and leave the rest the same.
I like to actually do it live and record the automation.
That's another way to do it. That's a pro move to record if you have. It's hard to do with the mouse. You kind of have to have physical faders for that.
Yeah.
Or use the digital touch screen faders. You can do that too.
Yeah. I have a trackpad and it works really good using that.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a program called Logic Remote. You can use like an iPad to do a virtual mixing board.
Oh yeah, nice.
And control it remotely. I have not done that, but I know that you can. I usually just draw in sections. There's also a great plugin from Waves. It feels like cheating because it's so good, called Vocal Rider, and you can put that on a track and adjust the parameters and the threshold, and it will just ride your fader for you. It's a great way to kind of even out the dynamics without using a compressor, which may be a little heavy-handed sometimes, because compressors can add color and weight and other kind of things to track that just volume writing doesn't do. Actually, I like to volume write and then into a compressor, and then the compressor can add color and even things out even more or whatever. EQ is also super important. I like to roll off the low end. I have a different roll off for me than for you. Obviously, you have a more resonant tone. I roll you off at about 90, 95. And I think where do I roll myself off? I roll myself off a little higher, about 100.
Interesting. Yeah, I've got a high pass on me at 60.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you're still resonant about 80, 90. and the process, the post-processing that I do adds some of that back. So I try to make it so that we both sound kind of the same. Like one voice is not more resonant or anything than the other. Like we're having a conversation in the same room is my goal, to have it sound like that. But yeah, EQ is really important, especially taking out that low rumble helps to get well, it doesn't really need to be there. Most voices don't have much down below, say, 100 or 80. In a mixing situation, you really can't hear that stuff, and it's just gonna muddy up that space where the bass and the kick are supposed to live. So you don't really want that down there anyway.
My high pass is more for ambience in the room.
Oh yeah. That's what I mean by rumble, like just like general room noise or whatever. That kind of lives down there. Just touching your foot to the floor, all that stuff that really doesn't need to be in the mix or in the vocal edit. I also like to use a shelf to give a little air up and top, and I'll mess around with like the clarity areas, and there's usually kind of like a muddy resonance around 200 that I like to scoop out a little bit sometimes. Every voice it's hard to speak in general terms because every voice is different, and you're talking about situations where you may be editing a podcast, you may be editing vocals for mixing. I mean, for mixing a song. So it's all going to be a little different in terms of EQ, but EQ is really important for clarity and just to make things fit together better in the mix. There's another way to other than a gate, you can use a function that, depending on your DAW, may be called strip silence or other things. And you'll have to really play with the parameters. But what that does is it takes a region and it will basically look for the waveforms. And it's kind of like a gate, but way harsher. And it will just basically like cut and leave only the sections that have waveforms and take out the sections that don't. And you can set the parameters like a gate so that anything that's just like a very small waveform will be silenced out completely. That I don't like to use that too much because it could be problematic. If you need stuff to sound like it's really in a room, then you're just kind of like suddenly where people are speaking, there's going to be some room ambience, and then when they're not, it's going to be just like falling off a cliff.
Yeah, and it depends on the frequencies of the room noise, because when you pull that out, it then applies that filter to all the audio.
Right.
And it could be pulling out frequencies from that you don't want, that you don't want to have pulled out because your vocals are have harmonics in the same bands as what's being pulled out. Interestingly, if you're a Reaper user, that plugin is called Reefer.
It's funny. Yeah. That's going to take me a second. So on that note, there's I failed to mention some of the things that I like to leave in most of the time, depending. And here's a situation where compression might get you into a little trouble. Breath sounds, for instance. I feel like if you take all the breath sounds out in a song or in a podcast, it feels unnatural because it's people and they breathe, and especially before a big belt, people take an intake of breath, and sometimes those breaths act as ghost notes in a song, and compression really makes those stand out. In some songs, I'm like, go listen to a Nine Inch Nails song, you'll hear he loves the sound of just that compressed, intense breath to kind of give it helps the intensity of that kind of music. But with, there are times when I will, chop the audio right there and fade the breath so that it's not so calling attention to itself. You know what I mean? So when I'm editing audio, that is one thing that I like to do is fades, little fades at the end. Basically, I like to do little fades at the front and little longer fades at the end of regions. Say I have a phrase, like the one that I'm speaking right now. If I'm going to cut next to those words, like before I started talking and after I finished talking, I'll do a little tiny fade at the front, a little longer fade at the back end. And what that'll do is it'll cut out the possibility of any clicks and pops from audio getting cut off before it was completely silent. And that's something that I will find when I basically audition vocals in headphones so that I can hear all the little clicks and pops and things. But the short fade in front is because that's usually there's nothing there, and I do a longer fade in the back because sometimes a word will trail off, and if you cut it too soon, you'll like lose consonants and things. I find sometimes something that looks like an artifact actually isn't an artifact. It's like the end of a consonant, like the T or K, for instance. So that's another thing that I like to do.
So
Checking my notes.
Oh yeah, I was just thinking about. I think you mentioned a pop filter, and then when you were talking about not so much the clicks, I think those kind of still come through, but definitely the plosives and some of the S's. It kind of soothe. It depends on your filter and what it's
Right.
constructed of, but it can help there a lot too.
Yeah, that gets into that kind of whole range of like really editing. So you have things like sibilants, which I always find it funny, and maybe it's not an accident that the word sibilance has, twice the sibilance of a word that doesn't have any s's or sounds. It's good to use, I think, a de-esser. You used to have to, finagle a side chain and compressor and EQ and stuff, and now you can just throw an anti-sibilance plugin on your chain and have it do the work for you. I like wave sibilance. I'm liking the new Eosis one from Slate Digital. I like those too because they're set and forget. There's other ones, but that's a good way to kind of treat that sound, which, especially if you're doing like pop vocals and you're trying to give it more juice at the high end, it really can kind of make if you're not paying attention or if you're not careful, I mean, you can make it really kind of hurt.
Yeah.
those sibilant notes up there.
I like
lip smacks. I don't like lip smacks when people I'm like me right now, I'm talking too much and my mouth gets dry and you can hear lip smacks. Those I will definitely edit out. Whenever I hear them, they drive me up the wall. But breaths I will leave in for the most part.
I like the audition feature in the Waves Sibilance plugin.
I like that you can see exactly what it's doing.
The thing is, those plugins, I have found, need to be light-handed with them.
Yes.
Because they do a lot of damage real fast.
Sure. Yeah, you can if you can make people sound like they're lisping if you if you turn them up too much. Funnily enough, I like de-essers on guitar tracks and cymbals sometimes because it'll take some of that harshness out.
Yeah, that's kind of a common thing to do, and it's also used like if you're adding some saturation, and then you can kind of roll the highs off, which that might be something that you do on your compressor or a transformer plugin or something like that. And
yeah, I like transformer plugins and I like tape saturation for that to kind of take away that harshness and roll off a little bit of that high end and just kind of thicken it out.
And, obviously EQ is probably a way to go with that, but you can use a sibilance to kind of achieve the same end.
Yeah, there's a funny thing about, and I think we talked about this in a different episode, but there's a section of the spectrum that is kind of like, I think of it as the clarity area. and that's around it's around 10K. There's an area where vocals kind of stand out in the mid range, and that's in the like 1,000 to 2,000 range. But right where the consonants live is right about the same place where sibilance is a problem. So it can be a balancing act sometimes to take away the harsh sibilance while maintaining clarity if you're trying to bump up a little at 10K but reduce a little sibilance. But like I said, there's that section, then there's the mud section around 200, 250, and then I kind of like to roll stuff off anywhere between below 80 and below 100 or 120, because it depends on the voice again and what you're doing with it. There's another tool that I like. Sometimes you'll get a really kind of poppy clicky vocal, and this is more of a specialty tool that if you need it, you need it, and if you don't, well, you can kind of do some surgical EQ or whatever. But it's the Waves, no, not Waves, no, Isotope RX.
Yeah.
There's a declick. They have a declick plugin, and you can put that on it. It causes a delay, so you have to do plugin compensation, but you can't really do it live while you're recording, but you can do it in the post. And it really does go through and finds those little transient clicks from mouth noises and other stuff.
Yeah.
It's a really good.
Have you
tool for that.
Have you ever used Spectral Editing?
I haven't, because I've only recently had availed myself of something that will do that.
So it's like, well, there's actually a spectral editing function in Reaper, but you can spectral edit in RX, I believe. Although I don't really use RX. I've only played with it a few times.
Mhm.
And it's like having a scalpel, and
Right.
you can really zoom in, and then you can edit down to the milliseconds. So if you've got an offensive sound or noise, in the original recording or something like that, you can go in and select an area. And as I said, the resolution's like, down into milliseconds, and select an area of the spectrum and isolate just the noise. And then you can attenuate it, just those frequencies, just that audio. And you can apply compression or other plugins just on that selection.
Mhm.
So it's really, really powerful. And then if you've got repeated clicks and things like that, you can do one, and then you can basically copy and paste and move those edits over to the same sounds that occur later in the audio, if you have many of them. So
that's really cool.
It's really cool. I would suggest playing with it, because it's quite fun to mess with, and it works really, really well for audio repair.
Yeah, I understand it's really popular in the film industry, and also in the like the restoration, like if you have old tapes.
Oh, sure.
Like people do that for a living, where they'll take old tapes and they got to transfer it to digital, but they got to take all the all the artifacts out. Yeah, it's supposed to be really good for that. It's not cheap. I think it's in the hundreds of dollars range, but it's definitely worth it.
Yeah.
I have the Elements version, the RX Elements, which is much more inexpensive, and it's the plugin form. I don't know if it even has the spectral editing in it.
Yeah, it's built into Reaper, so it
that's another plug for Reaper there.
It's not even really
Reaper.
It's not really even a plugin per se. You just change.
No, I meant a plug for Reaper.
Yeah, I know.
I don't begrudge you that.
But
hey man,
you know how you view your waveform while you're recording, or or in playback even, in your timeline, you just switch your timeline to spectral mode in Reaper.
Oh wow,
and
that's cool.
It is. Anyway, yeah, plug in.
One thing I didn't mention, which is like a
what Leary say?
Trick.
Plug in, check out.
Oh, it was a tune in.
Yeah.
What? Turn on, tune in, drop out, something like that. Tune in, turn on, drop out. Yeah. When I was talking about the dynamic range of vocals, one of the things that I meant to mention was a really great trick that a lot of people use. I use it all the time to maintain the dynamic range, but still bring up the volume and thickness without hurting the delicacy of the higher stuff, and to make stuff clear without beating it with a hammer, is to do what's called parallel compression, which the way I like to do it, because I can see what I'm doing, is I duplicate the track, put a compressor on the second version, compress it very heavily, and then mix it in underneath the first version. I find that way is, to me, better than putting a compressor on the main version and then using the wet dry to do a fake parallel compression. I just, for some reason, it just sounds better to me to do it that way. But that's a great way to kind of beef up your vocals while maintaining the dynamic range. And then you can, if you want, you can bust those two together so that you can just have one fader to ride.
Speaking of writing faders, it is, if you're doing like volume, or even if it's volume automation or writing the faders, you'll never get artifacts from just using your faders versus if you were using some type of plugin for managing your levels or something like that, or applying compression or other effects and things. So it's really in the digital domain, it's one of the cleanest ways to manage your volume levels when you're editing. So I always like to go to that first to see if I can get what I need fader writing to control, gain as it's occurring in the editing process, listening back to the audio playback.
Yeah, it's super transparent. It's way more transparent than pretty much any compressor.
Yeah,
I would think, because you're just changing the volume and you're doing it selectively, so you're not grabbing the stuff that you didn't want.
Yeah, and I think that's in comparison to like a limiter. So if you were using limiting to boost your gain, go to the fader first and see what you can get out of that, and work on your gain staging with your faders first before you turn to a limiter.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I was about to say something else. For compression, when you do compress vocals, I find that for the most part, optical compressors like an LA2A, the classic vocal compressor, that's a good musical yet transparent and natural sounding compressor. I also like the 1176 style. Those are very common vocal compressors, depending on what you're doing. Again, oddly and maybe uniquely, one of my workhorse secret go-to compressors for vocals has always been this silly Waves one knob louder, which just it just adds a little touch of transparent volume. I just like that on the vocal bus. It just kind of lives there. I don't even think about it anymore, but it just adds a little something. I was mentioning fades a minute ago, and one thing that I do like to do with vocal editing is crossfades. Like if I have to pull something together or drop a word in to fix a word that was too quiet or mangled, I like to do a crossfade so that there's no dropout, there's no click, there's no pop, and everything kind of blends better from one to another. Crossfade is when you have a region, you drag it over another region, and fade between the two. Different DAWs do them differently. Sometimes you have to click and tell it to do that. Logic will do it if you have drag set to crossfade. It will do it anytime you drag one region over another, even a little bit. And it's just a nice way to transparently blend regions together so that there's no pops or clicks. And you mentioned plosives, which happens when you get a P sound, a P. And you can learn to recognize what that waveform looks like. Like if you're hearing a pop or a click, and if you zoom in, you can usually see it. And it doesn't take that long to learn to recognize, oh, there it is. And what I'll do is chop it right in the middle so that I don't lose the clarity of the P, because if you chop it all the way off, then there's no consonant to start the word. It's usually on the start of a word when somebody hits the P too hard. And I usually chop it right in the middle and do a tiny little fade so that you just get the sense of the P, and without the blast that sends the volume up. That's all the tricks I have right now.
Is it?
I went through my list, and not in any particular order, so there's kind of like rambling all over the place. But
that's Matt's bag.
That's my vocal bag of tricks for editing. Levels, EQ, crossfade, a little bit of compression, vocal automation in sections, and gate. Those are my big deals.
Yeah. Outstanding.
Do you have anything to add to that there, Doug?
Well, I think the only thing I wanted to add is like to control your noise floor. That
Yep.
If you find that you're turning your preamps up too much, then that's going to, well, it basically makes your mic signal a lot hotter.
Right.
And what that does is it brings all that ambient noise in with it. And so if you can find that happy place in your mic pre-level, and also that could be by adjusting your microphone proximity, or standing closer to the microphone, projecting more.
Right.
There's just different ways to make your voice hotter in the microphone without having to use your preamp to bring that up. So if you can set your preamp lower, you'll have less ambient noise in there, but you'll need to compensate by either your proximity or how much you're projecting with your voice into the microphone.
Yeah, good mic technique and getting that level right at the outset. I agree. Very important.
Now for me,
Cool.
I've got a vocal. Well, I guess it's not really you could use it for other stuff, but for me, it's a channel strip, and I take the channel strip and run it into my mic pre. My mic pre is actually on 0, and so all the gain that you're hearing is actually coming from my channel strip. And so by doing that, I have a strong enough signal without having to boost the gain. I'm only like 2 or 3 bars of I don't know what that equates to in dB right now because I can't see it, but of mic pre gain, but I'm maybe 60-70% of gain in my channel strip. So my channel strip's really boosting it. It's kind of like a cloud lifter on a microphone, if you know what those are. So, which is basically a signal booster. But then I go into a really low set mic pre, and that really keeps any ambient noise from coming in. And when you combine that with like a gate or something, then you can really attenuate the stuff that you don't want to be coming into your recording.
Yeah, that's a really good point about not setting your input too hot, because then you'll not only pick up your voice, but you'll pick up all of the other noise that you don't want. And that goes for the same of if you have a low vocal recording and you bring up the gain in your mixing situation, then you're going to do the same thing. So compensate with good mic technique, good volume control, and get that recording right at the start, and then you'll have less work to do.
Yeah, good one, Matt.
Hey, right on. Thanks for the opportunity to let me ramble on about vocal editing, and I look forward to vocal editing this podcast later this week.
Right on. I'm gonna do some gain automation before I send it over to you.
Just to see if I can undo it. Oh, too funny. Well, I missed you, Doug.
All right,
glad you're back.
It's good to be back.
Thanks everybody for listening. Thanks for tuning in week in, week out. We really appreciate you.
We do.
And we hope you're having a great week.
And we'd appreciate it if you would give us a review on iTunes.
We would be so happy if you did that. We would love that.
All right, everybody. Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Thanks. Cheers.
See ya. It's where I get to do stuff like
vocal editing. Mac
has to spend and time and
post-production.
Well, that wraps up another episode of the Indie Music Podcast. Please like and subscribe, share with your friends, or just leave us a review on iTunes if you like what you've heard. Find our social links and episode guide at indiemusiccast.com. Until next time, keep creating.